Welcome to the EntreEd Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Toy Hirschman and
Laura McCall.
Join us as we dive into incredible stories from inspiring entrepreneurs around the world.
Whether you are an educator looking for ideas to engage students, a new learner, or someone who wants to be inspired, our guest journeys and their ideas will give you resources to create value and take your own leap into entrepreneurship.
We are so looking forward to sharing our message with you.
And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe to the EntreEd Talk podcast on whatever platform you listen.
Welcome to EntreEd Talk podcast. I'm Laura McCall, and I'm so very happy to be joined by Steve Auerbach in Hawaii. Steve is the Interim Director of the Office of Innovation and Commercialization for the Office of Vice President for Research and Innovation within the University of Hawaii. Their office manages the research and innovation developed at all 10 campuses within the University of Hawaii system. Previously, Steve served as the Director of the Pacific Center for Advanced Technology Training and Continuing Education. The center at Honolulu Community College is a consortium of the University of Hawaii community colleges. They're responsible for incorporating an active advisory board for workforce economic development as well as job creation. Steve also served in a variety of senior executive positions with Hewlett-Packard Corporation. For 20 years, his career there took him into the educational services, sales, business development, marketing, and product development, as well as global business unit management. Most recently, he was the leading HP's $380 million accessories and internet services global entrepreneurship business unit in San Diego, California. Steve currently serves as on the board of the USS Bowfin Submarine and Museum Park at Pearl Harbor in the capacity of Senior Vice President. Additionally, he serves in the Oahu High School's advisory board, co-chairing the Information Engineering Technology Academy. Mr. Auerbach is a mentor for Everwise, a leader in workforce mentoring using an innovative platform leveraging data analytics, planning, decision-making, and workforce science to dramatically improve workforce development. Oh my goodness, welcome, Steve, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, and that's a very nice intro.
And I'm sorry if I botched up that words in the high school. Don't kill me on that one, okay?
No problem.
So your journey has taken you so many different wonderful places, and you've had the opportunity to be at the catalyst for change and creating, sustaining various aspects of the Hawaii higher education system. But before you dive into that, can you tell me more about your own entrepreneurial journey and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. You know, I born and raised here. I had an opportunity to go through the public school system, did my undergraduate and graduate work at the University of Hawaii. And, you know, coming out of that, I really, you know, through that K-12 area and time in my life, I really enjoyed building things, right? Whether it was building a radio, early days of a PC, electronics, it was just some in my DNA to build stuff. And so I really wanted to do something from a career standpoint in the tech area, given my aspirations and enjoyment of building stuff. And I ended up getting on with Hewlett-Packard, as you mentioned. And, you know, one of the great benefits of Hewlett-Packard is they move me around a lot. And I had an opportunity to live in different cities and work on different projects and work in different business units. And you mentioned that. And I think it was probably early to mid-career that the light bulb went off, Laura. And it was like, wow, this, we call it entrepreneurship, but right. And this is really enjoyable. I'm fascinated by this stuff. And at the time, Hewlett-Packard was facing significant headwinds. And so we were trying to restructure our organization and be much more lean and agile and figure out how to invent. HP has been known as an engineering and an invention type of company, but we're losing some of that. And so competition was fierce. And so we ended up carving out a business unit and went through the lean methodology, Steve Blank's lean methodology. And we actually read a bunch of books of Guy Kawasaki, who's a product evangelist and very much into startups, and ran the organization through this training and culture shift to be much more agile, leveraging the lean methodology. And out of that, then we carved out this business, like I said, to really figure out how to start new businesses and incubate new business around our core HP franchise. And I was working in the computing and the printing business unit. And like any other entrepreneurship effort, majority of the projects you work on or programs or products you work on never make it to market. And so I have many stories about those that never made it to market, and I have a couple stories of those that did make it to market. But that was the journey that was really, really fascinating for me, and happy to share some of the stories if there's interest.
Talking about things that don't make it, we often talk to entrepreneurs, and I think that's a huge part of it, that things do fail, or in this case, don't ever see the light of day. It may not have been a failure, but didn't see the light of day. And I think, like you mentioned, that's part of the process. And some things will take and some won't take. And I'm sure you talk about that when you mentor students on campuses. Getting back to maybe a previous job of yours, I would love to hear a little bit more about the workforce. You had the workforce division on a consortium position. And I think I too used to be in the workforce division of a community college. And I so appreciate that it's such a vital part of the community and of creating jobs, certificates, various ways of learning and various degree processes that are pertinent to certain people and don't work for others. But what did you do as that lead person in your workforce organization, and what did you guys focus on?
Yeah, that was a fun journey, coming out of private industry, and I wanted to get back home and do something, for the community, and got into academia. I never worked in academia. At HP, it was running the education unit, but this was a total 180 for me, but very, very fulfilling. And so one of the first things I did when I assumed the role is, and it's part of any time I change roles, is I do a lot of listening and learning. And so I went out and did a landscape assessment across the state to really understand with our private industry and government entities, what are the gaps in workforce from a technology standpoint? Because that's my skill set and interest. And lo and behold, as I met with 30 plus private and government agencies around their gaps in their workforce, there was 5 themes that surfaced. There's a gap in folks that had cybersecurity experience and skills. There was a gap in data sciences, big data, in skills and experience. There was a gap in innovation entrepreneurship, interesting enough. So the creative thinker, the problem solver. There was a gap in coding and software development. There was a gap in project management. So those and program management, those were the key. When I say project management, program management, I also do systems engineering. So those were the 5 areas, Laura, that were gaps across the state. And so then what I did is I structured my organization to go after, again, I like to build things and solve things. Those are problem sets or gaps. We then developed curriculum, working with third parties, working with our faculty, and address those gaps by delivering workforce development solutions for industry. Now, I'm also a firm believer that in order for us to get ahead of these gaps, it's almost too late to start at post-secondary. And so I pivoted and said, you know what, let's start focusing on K-12 as well. It wasn't either or, we did both. We did post-secondary and K-12. And the K-12 was capacity building around getting our students interested in data sciences, cybersecurity, coding, entrepreneurship skills, so that when they do hit post-secondary, they're a couple steps ahead. I didn't have that advantage as a kid growing up, right? I didn't know entrepreneurship and coding and cybersecurity until later in my career. And so we spent a lot of time working with K-12, and you mentioned my role with the Waipahu High School. It was part of me giving back to make sure that the curriculum at the high school level is addressing some of the gaps that are needed in the workforce.
You talk about, or we've mentioned before you and I got online, creating a pipeline, and it sounds like that just almost naturally came, creating that pipeline where you recognize the need, not just through the college, but through K-12. Did your staff have a hard time pivoting in those directions?
No, I think it came naturally. Part of, especially at the community college level, we really strive for every high school student entering college. That's important. And unfortunately, it's not the reality, right? And so across my team, the biggest stretch was really finding quality curriculum that could address the K-12 audience as well as the post-secondary audience. And fortunate enough, we were able to pull that together and do a bunch of interventions, online, face-to-face, different types of camps. We did this. It's an amazing thing for K-12. The national, so cybersecurity is one of those areas that was a gap. the National Security Agency, through the National Science Foundation, funded different colleges across the U.S. in this thing called Gen Cyber. And their camps for really high school students and teachers. And so we actually went after that proposal, solicited, put a proposal together. We actually won it. And we ran camps for the last 5 years, every summer. And it was an accelerated cybersecurity camp where we did teacher training. So, I'm a firm believer you help convert and nurture and support our valuable teachers. They're going to be in a classroom of 20 students. So that scales, right? So we did a bunch of teacher training in cybersecurity, and then we did a bunch of student training in cybersecurity with the goal of students and teachers having an appreciation of cybersecurity, understanding the workforce requirements and potential opportunities, walking away with it, a general overview. They're not going to be experts, right? It's an entry point around cybersecurity. And lo and behold, quite a few of the graduates coming in had no idea about cybersecurity. Coming out of it, had an appreciation and actually affinity for cybersecurity. And so that's the kind of program back to how do we address, and pivot the organization. We would do different innovative programs like that to really engage.
That it kind of answers my next question. I talked about that was the pipeline. It sounds like you introduced these students to something that they didn't have. And I'm assuming some of them went on to university level where they maybe pursued those degrees. Is that correct? Was it a natural progression?
Yeah, and one thing that's cool about cybersecurity, you can be a language person, right? Whether it's Korean, Farsi, Russian, Mandarin, whatever the case may be. Or you can be a real deep technical person. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. The deep technical person is typically where people go. But from a career standpoint, you can be on the social sciences side and be very successful in a career in security or intelligence. It doesn't have to be just a technical part, right? And so I think for us as a higher ed institute, post-secondary, we're addressing social scientists and natural scientists, right? And so some of the students decided this is not for them. Some of the students said, this is for me. And some of the students said, I'm still evaluating. And the best win is when they can actually, and this was part of building the capacity within the system. NSA has these things called academic CAE, Centers of Academic Excellence. Well, when I first started, we had one institution across our 10 that was a Center of Academic Excellence. We now have 5, right? So now students have an option to go. They typically want to go to a school that's designated as a CAE if they want to pursue a career in cybersecurity. Whether it's private or federal. And we now have 5, like I mentioned, and the onboarding from a pipeline standpoint, K-12 introduced to cybersecurity, potentially a 2-year to 4-year, go right to a 4-year, enter a CAE. Those CAEs are 2-year and 4-year institutions. So it's not just a 4-year that's a CAE designation. And then from there, you look at graduate programs, and then you look at internships and mentorships. And I think it's all stemmed from that affinity and appreciation early on for cybersecurity. The same thing can go on for entrepreneurship. That's why I'm a firm believer at the K-12 level, Laura, and we're doing that now in this current role, is how do we engage our K-12 in design thinking, lean methodology, working on problems that they got to try and solve with faculty members or their instructors or their parents. If they learn that skill set early on, the pipeline into the institution, post-secondary, is natural as well. If they become an entrepreneurship, great, and they start a business, which our community sorely needs. If they don't, guess what? They're still learning a valuable, transferable, lifelong skill that, again, back to my I wish I had early on, which I didn't. And so that's another area, that is really, really a focus in my current role as entrepreneurship and innovative minds.
We talk about that within our office, within our team. None of us had that in school. And what would have changed had we had that introduction to entrepreneurship? I think because we're in the office of EntreEd, we've all found our own way into it, but, kind of wonder would we found it sooner. You found it through HP and then found another way to extrapolate it out to, a university setting. So I want to ask a little bit about this university setting. You have a very big title to be heading the research and innovation. And you said some key words previously, the listen, learn, and finding the gaps. So what do you do in your division to listen, learn, and find those gaps within the University of Hawaii system and Hawaii in general to,
Yeah, good. And I'm going to say the need for what we're doing, and I'm not trying to, this is important for the community. I'm not trying to overshadow other areas of focus, but given the realities of COVID-19, we're in a crisis here in the state. And I'm not discounting other states. There's situations, dire situations, but we're heavily tourist-based in hospitality. And so our unemployment is one of the highest in the nation. We have industry that's very much non-manufacturing. We rely heavily on the tourists, as I indicated, in government, given the military presence here. And many of our businesses are not going to ever open. They're going to shut down forever, right? And we, to this day, still have not opened up our state. We're 8 days away from opening. Your listeners will hear this after the 15th of October and hear a little bit about how it's going. But October 15th is when we're actually going to be opening the state and for tourists and travel. And so all the more importance to drive this innovation and entrepreneurship mindset. And so my current role, Laura, I have responsibility for our Office of Innovation and Commercialization. Within that unit, we have traditional tech transfer, technology transfer. Most universities, research universities have technology transfer offices. And what my team's mission with the tech transfer office is, we work with researchers and faculty, and they're doing world-class research. It just so happens in the University of Hawaii, we have ocean sciences, we have astronomy, we have a medical school, a cancer school, a great engineering school, a good computer science school, a great business school, great social sciences. And so we'll work with researchers in each of those units that are actually doing world-class research, and we help them figure out how to take their invention or their disclosures and potentially commercialize it. And so why would a researcher or faculty member be interested in commercializing some of the research or their technology? Well, my answer back to the faculty member is societal and economic impact, right? Imagine what he or she can do with the research that they're doing if it turns into a marketable or commercial product, service, or solution. And one of the challenges we have within that office is many of our faculty are really good at the research, really good at their teaching, and are, like me, didn't learn it till mid-career innovation entrepreneurship. So how do we spend time with the faculty to nurture them and support them around the assets of innovation? How to write a commercialization plan? What's available through the small business SBIR, STTR resources? How do you do a spin out? How do you run them through an accelerator, right? What are some of the initiatives that we can expose our faculty to so that they actually start adopting and adhering to become more innovative and invent and disclose and develop patents? And that office gets measured on disclosures, patents, royalty revenue, startups, and that's key to the tech transfer office, right? And
wow.
One of the things that we can't change, but I'd like to see it changed over the journey while I'm here, is for tenure and promotion, our faculty aren't measured on patents. They're not measured on startups. They're not measured on disclosures. They're not measured on royalty revenue they're bringing in. They're measured on teaching, publishing, and doing research. So our key is to work with them and turn that in. Okay, if you're going to publish something, how about publishing a patent? That could count as a published paper. It's just happened to be a patent. Well, you're bringing in research extramural monies. How about if you bring in royalty revenue from the spin out of the startup based on your technology that you invented in your lab, and that brings in royalty to your unit that you can invest back into? That's a version of bringing in research dollars. That's what they get measured on, right? So we're working with them to ensure that they understand, and we understand as a team, the value of the tech transfer. So the other unit in my organization is we have UH Ventures, and it's an LLC. UH Ventures allows us to bring in private and federal money and invest money out. So one of my key initiatives this year is to work with private and corporate funders to see if they're willing to help invest in UH Ventures, which basically means if we have a researcher that's developing something out of astronomy or ocean sciences or the cancer school, and they want to help invest in that to nurture that product or service to the next level and commercialize it, then that's part of the UH Ventures initiative. We run an accelerator out of that, other initiatives. And then the last component within my organization, which is back to this pipeline I mentioned earlier, Laura, is how do we work with the incoming students? So I talk about the high schoolers, if they get exposed to innovation, entrepreneurship, lean methodology, design thinking, how do we help support them? Whether it's an entrepreneurship club out of their high school, and then partner with our entrepreneurship club here in post-secondary, potentially getting them back to my UH Ventures. How do we potentially give a scholarship to those entrepreneurs that are entering post-secondary so they can come to this institution and continue to learn about entrepreneurship? And then within that, it's the support mechanism for those post-secondary students within that are really like-minded around innovation entrepreneurship. Because at the end of the day, Laura, what I'm really trying to strive for is that those graduates, and I mentioned this earlier, learn the fundamentals and have an interest and affinity in entrepreneurship. It's just like if you have an affinity for art, wouldn't it be nice to have an affinity for entrepreneurship? Or have an affinity for entrepreneurship, you should also have an affinity for art, right? And really balance the students out. I'm gonna stop there because I keep talking. I'm passionate about this. I'm sure you have other
said
questions.
so much, and what strikes me is your whole entrepreneurial innovative approach to the office itself, because you're taking a profession that, as you said, has been measured by a certain way. Tenureship is certainly very unique measurements, and yet you're asking those who, in your university to pivot. And I'm sure that's not easy when you have strong minds and serious minds and brilliant minds working and doing research. As you're talking, you mentioned art, and I thought about that. Often, of course, we talk about artists are not always the best business persons, but they need to be. And I would imagine that it's similar with the research world. Professors maybe love to do research, but don't want to be bothered with the patents or the other things that could be an amazing offshoot. So,
you're hitting the nail on the head, Laura. So,
I'll come out there and work with you on that one. I'm passionate about that too.
It's very important for our community. And, I talk about, we have world-class researchers here at the University of Hawaii, and they're doing some phenomenal discoveries, but they don't have that business acumen. The same side of it, we have very strong business people, but they don't have the research side of it. And my analogy is in the coding environment, giving them so technical, you have a great coder, but you don't have the person to understand design. Or you have a great designer, but he or she doesn't understand coding. Imagine if you put them together. Imagine if you put a great researcher and a business person together, or you can develop that skill set. Potential. Unreal potential.
It's a blow up. It's a potential to blow up in great ways. You lead me to my next thought of what I want to find out about. Hawaii, I think, is very unique in that you guys have one school system, correct, across the whole state. That's really unbelievable. And yet everybody we meet from Hawaii is just phenomenal. And we always say, gosh, we wish our kids could go there for some schooling. So what do you, with this 10 campuses and what you're envisioning, what do you envision for higher education in Hawaii as a whole? And can your office help achieve it?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little context. So we have an initiative across the university. It's called Hawaii P20. And it's basically a goal of 55% of our Hawaii's working age adults have a 2 or 4 year degree by 2025, right? And so, that's how do you achieve some of that? It's, strengthening the rigor of the school curriculum, increasing student access and success in college, facilitating programs like I talked about that are available at K-12, applied-based programs, right? Because it's really place-based and applied-based versus just sitting in the classroom, especially now with COVID, right? And then really driving that K-12 culture around innovation and entrepreneurship. And so what I think that's unique, as you mentioned, is we are one system, right? From a K-12 and also from a higher ed, the 10 campuses. And so with really looking at our P20 assets, and it's a great team that's running that, and they're all about pathways and then providing career mentorship, internship opportunities that, again, back to this place-based. So that's I think the cornerstone of how we're trying to drive that leverage of that one system.
I think it's interesting too to have the one system, because I'm sure you're very culturally diverse throughout the state. And so to recognize cultural diversity and yet try to find a way to assimilate everybody into one system, I'd imagine is a huge challenge. what would you say to higher educators across the country who aren't in a one system, but what would you say to them about being innovative, maybe doing some of the things you guys are doing, and how does entrepreneurship fit into that landscape of higher ed?
Yeah, so I think, like any innovator entrepreneur, you got to take the risks, right? It's uncomfortable, aspire, push yourself. So that's number one. Number two, there's a lot of resources out there. I talked about it, I stumbled upon it 12 years ago at Hewlett Packard as a lean methodology. Now imagine the value of the K-12 audience, those that aren't in a one system. You actually were to stand up that curriculum across your institutions and standardize that curriculum around lean methodology. And it's all open source. That stuff's available. Certainly can send you some of the links. And then deploy that across your state or your county, whatever the school system's comprised of. And I think that would be a key component, so that we're starting them early on and learning that the lean methodology. The key thing for me out of the lean methodology, it starts with a customer, right? You may have a hypothesis. How are you going to fact check that? Well, you go out and talk to the customer, right? You don't create a product or a service without understanding, because it may not be a fit or a need. And then they have the business model or the mission model canvas. That's a great way. 9 components of that you can break down and have a hypothesis and fact check each of those components. If the customer's really going to pay this for that? Do they really see a value prop here? Right? And so I think just leveraging the resources. And the third thing, Laura, would be around, I think, monitor and assess. It's kind of like I talked about the landscape assessment. Go around and find out what other states are doing, whether they're a system or a non-system, around innovation entrepreneurship, and leverage some of the best practices.
The college where I came from in West Virginia was beginning to follow the lean methodology. And I think it was wonderful because they had a point person within the entire college to sit on various committees and be a part of that movement and helping people think through things. And I think it's important not just to do the lean methodology, but like they did, have a point person that is responsible for making sure that when new decisions are made or new divisions are created or whatever it is within a college system, that there's one person kind of guiding those principles and reminding everybody the data analytics and how to go about doing it. I'm a huge fan of Seth Godin, and people have heard me talk about that before. And you're saying exactly what Seth says. You have to know, who are you selling something to? Who are your people? Finding your tribe. And that's what you're saying, is that you can't just go out and create something and expect people to buy it, to be okay with it, whether it's a university system or whether it's an HP product, without understanding the individual client.
Yeah, you're fond of Steve, Seth. I'm really Steve Blank. So
okay,
two of them plus the two of us will be powerful.
There you go.
The other thing I was going to say, Laura, is back to the single system question you had. The 2-year level CTE is, people understand, as career technical ed, right? And so if you're going through a CTE construction, automotive, culinary, cosmetology, fashion, whatever the CTE program is, imagine if we were to feather in entrepreneurship skill sets in training. So if I'm going to be a beautician, wouldn't it be nice to run a business and understand that? So I'm not just a beautician working for some other company. I'm creating the next. Or fashion, I'm not working for some label. I'm creating the next label. Or culinary, I'm not working at a restaurant. I'm creating the next restaurant. And so it's very important. That's the other thing we're working on is how do we work with those career technical ed programs and feather in innovation entrepreneurship curriculum and thinking. And it goes back to the comment I made earlier. They may want to take that and start their own, create jobs for our community, or they may want to work for an entity. But guess what? Now that they have a different skill set and mindset, they're looking at ROI, the business impact, the customer engagement. Why do customers want to buy? Very important at the 2 and 4 year level. And so I just want to make an exclamation point around that point as well.
No, I totally agree with you. Having come from the workforce division in a community college in which I worked, it's true. There's lots of community colleges and high schools, for instance, doing fab labs and maker spaces across the country. But if they don't connect what you're saying to it, if they only provide the space for the invention, the artist, the whomever, then that's missing half the battle, it seems, because there's a disconnect on how to take that and then put it out in the community or in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a relatively simple thing to do. On the surface, it's very challenging, but how do I get, back to your system and a non-system, for us, how do I get 10 campuses that have CTE, any of them that have CTE programs, or take any class and feather in the entrepreneurship curriculum? And it's not like it has to take up the whole semester, but bring in somebody to talk about the business model canvas, bring in somebody to talk about the lean methodology, right? And bring in somebody that's been an entrepreneur and, true grit, figured out how to launch a business or a service or a widget, right? So that's important, that I think of a way for a single system or a non-system educational program.
I'm going to adopt your word feather. I like that because to me, with entrepreneurship, it's some of it's trial and error. If I think of what a visual of a feather, it's a movement, a wave, maybe something latches on, maybe it flies away. And I think that's a great image of layering and building until you kind of make it what you want, I guess.
Yeah.
So this has been flying by. I hate to say, I can't believe it. So we always like to ask, what would you tell others? And I think particularly with the focus on educators, higher ed, folks that may want to do what you guys are doing, what's the sage advice?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. And I'll close with a statement here. I talked a little bit about the dire state we're in with COVID, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. And it's imperative. It's a strategic imperative for higher ed. I would even say for K-12 as well, to figure out how we can educate more teachers as well as students to be thinking about innovation entrepreneurship. And I mentioned a lot of this early on, is whether it's feathered into the curriculum, the programs, whether they start a business, don't start a business. But I think it's going to get all of us to a different level and drive economic development and societal impact. And we really need it. Whether you're discovering a new vaccine or antibodies, or developing the next cloud system, or you're creating the next food product, or you're doing something from a social impact standpoint, our communities really need folks to be stepping up and doing more of it to help get us beyond this COVID situation. And so I encourage folks that may have not put a toe in the water around innovation entrepreneurship. There's a lot of resources out there. I can be available, certainly open to have conversations. There's best practices that are out there that people can leverage and learn from across the U.S. and post-secondary. There's many institutions that are doing it way better than the University of Hawaii, but I like to say UH is doing a very good job. We've got opportunities and certainly can be a resource for those that want to learn how to do it, and some of the tips and tricks we're doing here. And then the last thing I'll say, Laura, is really it's a world-class research institution. For me, it would be in our community. Imagine, a year, 2, 3, 5 years out, we have an opportunity where we're creating jobs, new industries, new services, new social impact activities are showing up in Hawaii. To me, that's a huge win.
I agree. We definitely talk about that with entrepreneurship, and particularly where I am in Appalachia, because there are pockets where people want to stay with family, they value family, they want to stay home and live, but there's no place to work. And so the whole idea is get creative, have that entrepreneurial mindset, and create your future. And you're saying the need for that is, as you said, very, very current with COVID. Obviously, unfortunately, it's not going away. And so I'm happy that you addressed something so current. Thank you. How can folks get in touch with you? I appreciate you offering to be a resource for folks. So what's the best way?
Probably the best way to get a hold of me would be at hawaii.edu/research/OIC.
Okay, great. And then your regular email as well, Steve.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, steve.auerbach@hawaii.edu.
Awesome. I'm always jealous of folks in Hawaii. It's always lovely to talk to you guys. I'm amazed and always impressed with what you guys are doing, and we appreciate you sharing with us. We have a nice little following in Hawaii, thanks to our friend Josh Repin, and I hope it continues to grow. So
Thank you for your support. Thank you for reaching out, and I wish you great success in helping cultivate and nurture the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Enjoy and
All right,
stay
keep in touch.
safe.
Yeah. Aloha.
Nice to talk.